I'm at the junction of two of the most famous streets in East London, Whitechapel High Street and Brick Lane. It's the epicentre of the old working-class immigrant East End, the district of London which has fascinated writers, novelists and social investigators more than any other part of this city. And I'm with Ken Worpole, who's a writer and literary historian. Ken, why has the East End exercised such a fascination?
Well, it's always been a great place of transition. It's obviously next to the docks, so it's been a port of arrival for generations of different groups from around the world.
And the early novels which were set in the East End in the 1880s, 1890s, you get the feel that this was a world apart, that the rest of London had no idea what was happening here unless they read some of those early slum novels.
Yes, I mean, there obviously were other parts of London that were as poor and as teeming with poverty and malnutrition and so on. I mean, Dickens, the Seven Dials around Covent Garden and so on. But the East End has all kind of locked itself into the English imagination as a place of kind of where people dared not go.
And it had no middle class, that was the reason why. It was almost exclusively working class.
Absolutely. I mean, there were some big houses for the captains along the river, but mostly it was tenement dwellings, high density, and obviously a lot of housing built by philanthropists.
Well, we've walked up now a couple of hundred yards to outside the most imposing building by far along Brick Lane. It's now the mosque for the local Bangladeshi community. Before that, it was a Jewish synagogue, and it was built as a French Huguenot church for French Protestants who are fleeing religious persecution. So 3 waves of refugees have used this building as a place of worship. But Ken, it's the Jewish East End which has been most captured in literature.
Yes, I mean, of all the different immigrant groups who've passed through the East End of London, by far the most productive in terms of literature, and in other ways, theatre, painting and so on, was the Jewish community, from the 1890s right through to the 1960s. Here was a group whose parents, even some of them themselves, had come from peasant communities in Poland or Russia. They found it very difficult to relate to, as it were, English middle-class literature. So a lot of things I wrote about were actually the problems of finding a voice of their own and finding a way of writing about the East End.
And now we have another community, largely of peasant stock, Bangladeshis from Sylhet, living in this area. Any sign that they are capturing their experiences in writing?
There is beginnings of that. But some people would say, well, often younger Bangladeshis are finding more forms of self-expression through music rather than literature.
Your father and mother were both East Enders. The Blitz 60 years ago, the closure of the docks 30 years ago knocked the stuffing out of one East End. Another East End has come up, but doesn't have the same cohesive identity. Are you concerned that that old notion, the magic of the East End, is disappearing?
No, because one can over-romanticise the past, and the poverty was dreadful, and many people, their lives were thwarted from birth to death. I mean, actually, in many ways, we're living in a society in which more and more cities are becoming transitional places. So I don't think there'll ever be any let-up to the fact that parts of London, like parts of all the major cities in the world, will continually be producing new voices and new hybrid cultures.
And that explains why this particular part of London is now known as Bangla Town, the town of the Bengalis. Ken Worpole, thank you very much.